Good morning. Thank you all for interrupting your morning for just a few minutes for us to take care of some business. As a reminder, if you'd silence your cell phones, please, so we don't have an interruption. And this board meeting is being live streamed. I'm Rosemary Altman, Chairwoman of the Mississippi Board of Education, and I'm present in the boardroom at the Mississippi Department of Education. This special call meeting of the Board of Education is being held today, September 2nd, 2021, at 10 a.m. via teleconference and video means pursuant to Mississippi Code annotated section 25415. Notice of this special call meeting was posted in accordance with state law and included the time, the date, the place, and the purpose of the meeting, and identified the location of the meeting so that it was available to the public. An audio recording is being made of this meeting, and minutes of this meeting will be recorded. The meeting is also being live streamed. Dr. Carrie Wright is present in the boardroom at the Mississippi Department of Education to participate in this teleconference. We do have a quorum, so as I call the names of the board members, please state the location. You only have to give the city and the state of your presence for this meeting. Dr. Wendy Barrett.
Ocean Springs, Mississippi.
Dr. Angela Bass.
President in Gaston, Mississippi.
Mr. Glenn East.
Present in Gulfport, Mississippi.
Okay, Dr. Karen Elam. Dr. Elam is traveling. She's not able to be with us. Is she with us on the phone? Dr. Elam, are you on the phone? Okay. Dr. Elam is on the phone, but she's muted. Mr. Bill Johnson.
He is absent today.
Yeah, he's trying to, he's got an appointment, but he's trying to be here.
Okay. Dr. Ronnie McGehee,
Present, Madison, Mississippi.
Mr. Matt Miller,
Present, Hattiesburg, Mississippi.
and Ms. Mary Werner.
Present, Saltillo, Mississippi.
Okay, good. A quorum of the board is
A
present.
quorum of the board is present at the location stated for the purpose of conducting this meeting through teleconference and video means. So the September 2nd, 2021 special call meeting is now called to order at 10:03 a.m. And since this is a teleconference video meeting, please identify yourself when asking questions or making comments or making motions. Dr. Wright, do you have any comments to make at this?
No, ma'am, I think it's going to be self-explanatory.
Okay, we are going to forego our usual opening and move right into the agenda. Board members, you each have received a copy of the agenda. And please note, this is a special call meeting, and therefore, the only business that can be transacted is that which has been specified in the call. At this time, I'll entertain a motion for approval of the agenda.
So moved. So moved, Ronnie McGehee.
Okay, Dr. McGehee, and a second.
Second, Matt Miller.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Raise your hand. Aye. Okay, motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, our item on the agenda is discussion of a board item. This will require a vote, and this is a long description of our action item, but this relates to the procurement of technology products and other professional services. And I'm going to just turn it over to Dr. Wright and to the appropriate persons for them to give us explanation of the item.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. We are going to be asking for an emergency approval for emergency procurement, but I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Gavin and to Joe Goff, who are going to walk you through the processes that we have followed up until this point and the reason for this special called meeting to ask for this approval. So, Dr. Gavin, I'm going to let you start.
Okay, good morning, board members. We do want to provide you, I know you have the board item, but we want to provide you this morning with some background and some context on the board item. We have been working over the last several months trying to procure services under the ESSER funds, And as you're aware, the state has received approximately $2.5 billion in elementary secondary school emergency relief funds. That's ESSER 1, ESSER 2, as well as ESSER 3 funds, with most of these funds actually going to the local school districts. And the purpose of these funds is to address the impact of COVID-19 has had and is still having on our elementary and secondary schools to ensure the health and the safety of our teachers as well as all of our students. The state has a 9.5 set aside from these funds, which must be used to provide direct support to the school districts. In addition, with ESSER 3, the law specifically outlines some specific uses of these funds, such as learning loss, after-school programs, and summer enrichment programs. Now, the local school districts, like I said, receive the bulk of these funds, and they had different timelines than the state does. The local school districts have until September of 2023 to actually award and spend their ESSER 2 funds, and September of 2024 to spend their ESSER 3 funds. So that's a little different, very different from the state requirements. We have very different timelines. The state requirement, which is established by the U.S. Department of Education to award the 9.5% set aside, it's a much more aggressive timeline. For ESSER 2, the MDE has until January of 2022 to actually award any contracts and grants associated. And for ESSER 3, we have until March of 2022 to actually award. So given this timeline and the lengthy state procurement process, the normal state procurement process is a very lengthy process. So given this timeline and the procurement process of this magnitude, we're asking to award all these funds. The agency is seeking emergency procurement authority as outlined in the state procurement law, which gives the agency head the authority to declare the emergency. And several of the agency staff, including Joe and myself, we have met numerous times with key staff at the Mississippi Department of Finance and Administration, as well as Information and Technology Services, to kind of walk through this process and to explore what our options were to make sure that we were able to procure all of these services within the designated timeline. And we wanted to make sure that we were following the correct path and that we were getting their guidance as we walked through this process. And as we were in conversation with DFA and ITS, we were also informed that other state agencies that have received COVID-19 funds have also procured goods and services through an emergency declaration, which is allowed under the state law. So although we are seeking your approval today to procure services through an emergency process, we still intend to utilize competitive processes to ensure that costs are reasonable and that we do our due diligence as much as we can, given the short time frame that we're operating in. So we're requesting approval to procure services through an emergency up to the full amount of our ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 dollars. However, some of the funds will be used to grant districts funds for various services, such as addressing their learning loss in the districts, after-school programs, school nurses, as well as mental health grants. In addition, we have also started the procurement process for other projects that will not require an emergency procurement. So we're asking the board for full approval of the entire amount of the ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funds, but recognizing that some of these funds will actually be in the form of grants and will not require emergency procurement processes. And we've also started the process for other contracts that will not go through the emergency procurement process. In summary, we are seeking approval for the State Superintendent of Education to declare an emergency for the procurement of technology products and other professional services due to COVID-19 because undertaking the non-emergency procurement process would actually threaten MDE's ability to respond to the public health and safety needs of our children, teachers, and parents across the state. Also, we're seeking approval to grant Dr. Wright the authority to request that the Public Procurement Review Board, which is the PPRB board, and Information Technology Services approve these contracts for up to 3 years. One-year contracts would not cover the full grant period, so the ESSER 2 funds must be awarded by January of 2022, and ESSER 3 funds must be awarded by March of 2022. So we're under typical emergency terms, the contracts are granted for 1 year, but we're asking for authority for Dr. Wright to seek authority to grant those contracts up to 3 years in order to be in compliance with what USDE is requiring, which means that the contracts have to be obligated by January, and then the ESSER 3 has to be obligated by March of 2022.
Joe?
Mr. Goff?
Good morning, Board. I just wanted to reiterate,
Would you pull the microphone closer? There you go.
okay. Good morning, Board. I just wanted to reiterate what Dr. Gavin said, that we have had a number of conversations with DFA and ITS concerning this item before you today. We really appreciate all of their assistance and guidance that they've given us throughout this process. I would also say that, again, the Mississippi Code, both ITS and DFA regulations that we've referenced in our board item, they allow for this emergency declaration by the state superintendent and this board. As Dr. Gavin said, the purpose of these funds, it's to address the impact COVID-19 has had and is still having on elementary and secondary schools to ensure the health and safety of our teachers and our students. Again, after numerous conversations with ITS and DFA specifically concerning this emergency procurement process, that resulted in this declaration item before you today. That's what brought us here today. This is not something that we take lightly. The agency is committed, like Dr. Gavin said, to still absolutely engaging in providing a fair and competitive process, performing a cost analysis for all of the funds spent in response to this emergency. I point out also that the PPRB's OPSCR Rule 3-207, it references the need for such competition as is practicable in these situations, and we're 100% committed to doing that. So we would appreciate your consideration today.
Any other comments, Dr. Wright?
No, I'm sure the board probably has questions, and we'll be more than happy to address those questions. I think this has been, a lot of due diligence on our part has been done, and I really have to say hats off to both Mr. Goff and Dr. Gavin, who have been, the number of hours that have been spent in conversation to get us to this place. So I feel like we're in a good spot, and we also want to make sure that we are good stewards of the money that the federal government has given us, and we want to make sure that we can expend those funds in an appropriate manner to help our children.
And may I add one other thing, Ms. Altman? Although we're asking for authority to enter into these contracts and to actually go out and procure these services through an emergency process, any contracts that we actually award before those contracts are finalized, we will still bring back to the board for your approval. We will not, we'll still follow our normal process that any contracts over $50,000 that the board would have to approve. And we do anticipate under this process that we will be bringing forth, starting in November through January, items for you to approve under the emergency process. But you will see each individual contract.
Okay, at this point, we'll open it up to the board. If you have questions, raise your hand so I can see Ms. Werner first, and then Mr. Miller, and then Dr. McGehee.
My question is, I don't understand, if you said that the last one, it was going to be like in January and then in March of 2022, I don't really understand why we need to go out for 3 years. When I owned my company, we did business with the state of Mississippi, and we bid every year on it. So I guess I just don't understand why we need to have a 3-year emergency.
And thank you, Ms. Werner. And thank you, Ms. Werner, for that question. That's a good question. And our agency, the Department of Education requirements on this money is a little different than it is with some of the other agencies. They actually require us to award the funds, the entire amount of the funds, by these particular deadlines. Although we will not actually, spend the money by that time frame, we have until the 3-year period to actually spend the funds, but we have to have identified who we're going to award those contracts to by those designated days.
Designated dates, Doctor, would be March of 2022?
Yes, that is for ESSER 3 is March of 2022, and for ESSER 2 is January of 2022. And the normal procurement process under the state law is a very lengthy process, so you're probably thinking, that's a ways off. But it actually takes 6 to 8 months sometimes to procure a contract of that magnitude, because it's not only has to be approved by you, but we have other state agencies that have to approve those contracts as well. Depending on what the contract is, it has to go to the Public Procurement Board, and then it also has to go to could have to go to ITS depending on what the actual contract is for. And they all, each of those entities have their timelines as well. And then we spend a lengthy time advertising as well. So the process is very lengthy if we follow the normal procurement process.
Thank you.
Mr. Miller, you had a question?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Is this, just so I'm clear, if we do not allocate these funds by these particular dates, it's use it or lose it, correct?
If the funds are not allocated by those dates, designated dates, we could, one or two things would happen. The funds would get reallocated and go out to the school districts, or we would have to send the money back to the federal government. One of those two options.
We would not have the discretion to spend those funds at the agency.
Got you. Thank you. Second question is that and I guess this is more of a question for Joe. Are we sure that if we take this emergency measure, we can extend contracts over a year, which is what's typically under the procurement law?
So that's with the second portion of the ask here before the board today. That addresses us not entering into just one-year contracts that we would then be attempting to extend. We're asking for the authority to request from both ITS and PPRB to waive that one-year emergency restriction to allow for these initial contracts to be for 3-year periods. So there wouldn't be a need to extend it beyond a 1-year period.
So that means that those two entities, which I can't repeat because I don't know the alphabet soup well enough, but if we, part of our ask is asking them to waive that 1-year requirement, and so that's another step in the process with this, correct?
Yes, sir.
Correct.
Yes, sir. That's correct. We would be asking for the Public Procurement Review Board, PPRB, and Information Technology Services Boards to both waive the 1-year restrictions concerning the emergency contracts for the reasons that Dr. Gavin described. Yes, sir.
The last thing I have is part question and part comment, and I read the statute. I think if we delay in these emergency measures, it would be detrimental to the interest of the state, would it not?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It would. It would.
Thank you. Dr. McGehee.
Joe, I have one also for you. Do we have a written legal opinion allowing us, the board, to approve this request to spend $230 million?
Well, as far as the process with the statute and in our discussions with ITS and DFA, the statute gives the authority, along with ITS and DFA's regulations, gives the authority for the agency head, given this criterion, to make that declaration. The authority rests with the agency head and this board to make that declaration, and once that declaration then is made, then the agency has the authority then pursuant to that statute and the ITS regulations and DFA regulations to proceed through this process. As far as a written legal opinion about it, we don't have that. However, all of our discussions with ITS and DFA, this is the process that is available for us to engage in, and that numerous other agencies have done the same thing. But this is it's triggered by this statute and their regulations.
It takes us to receive a written opinion on this.
Question is, do we need
Well,
one?
I'm not sure what the opinion would be addressing. I'm not sure I understand the question. I'm not sure what the opinion would be addressing concerning the statute and
Authority to declare an emergency for 3 years?
Well, that's where the ask is for. As far as the 3-year issue, the 1-year restriction, emergency contract restriction, that's what we're asking for ITS and for DFA to waive that based upon these particular circumstances. So the ask is for ITS and DFA to approve that, and it's their call then. on them waiving that 1-year restriction.
All right, so,
But the PPR.
Or that's the PPRB board and the ITS board, I should say.
So this declaration is to request them to
That's
make a
correct.
decision.
That's
So,
correct.
yeah.
It's for a declaration that we have an emergency, the need for an emergency procurement based upon this criterion, but then also to ask for DFA and ITS to waive that 1-year restriction. We do not have the authority as far as just entering into that 3-year contract. In our discussions with ITS and DFA, they would have to be the ones to actually waive that. So we're asking for the board for the authority to ask them to please waive that so that we could get the money spent during this timetable, because a 1-year contract is just not going to give us the ability to get this money out over a 3-year period of time, where other agencies might go back to those boards and ask for another 1-year emergency contract or another 1-year emergency contract. We're not in the position to do that based upon what Dr. Gavin described, that we have to present to the Department of Education by January 5th, and then by March of 22, the awarding of these funds through contracts.
so I hear you saying that we do not have a written opinion allowing us to approve this request. Is that right?
Well, you have a statute that gives
Yeah,
you
we
authority.
have a statute. I mean,
Yeah.
there's not a legal opinion that states that we have the authority to request this from you. But, and again, in all of our discussions with ITS and DFA, in accordance with this statute that allows for this, along with ITS and DFA, that referencing that code section that allows for an agency to go through this process, that's there. Yes, sir. Those regulations in the code section.
On the match points, if we do not agree to allow you this request today, what happens? Do we lose this money over a period of time, or do we lose part of the money?
So if we will lose part of the money, the part that's not, the part that we need to procure as an emergency procurement, if you do not give us the authority to declare the emergency and to seek the approval of the 1-year waiver, the money will go back to the feds, or we could reallocate it out to all of the school districts.
Also,
I would also add, if I could, that 1-year restriction, that relates to specifically ITS and DFA regulations. That's not a code section. That's ITS and DFA regulations. That's not referencing statute.
Mr.
And,
Yes, ma'am. So as I appreciate what we're doing, we're just getting permission to go before 2 other boards to extend these contracts. My hunch is, and tell me if I'm wrong, Dr. Gavin, is we have a date where we have to know where that money is supposed to be spent. And the reason we're looking for the 3-year contracts is we also have a date which that money has to be spent. And that gets us to those closing points. Is that pretty accurate?
That's correct.
Yes, sir, that is absolutely correct.
For the waiver, we're asking for the 3-year contracts because we do know we have a closing date when this money has to be spent. I'm assuming it's the same, we lose it or whatever case at that point.
Correct.
Okay, that's what I needed to know. And then again, we got 2 more boards going to look at this before we go forward, correct?
Correct, at least on the,
Correct, at least on the waiver of the 1-year piece. That's what we're asking approval for. We're asking for, it's a 2-part ask. Approval to enter into emergency contracts, and then to ask those 2 boards to waive the 1-year requirement.
this one has a question, I think.
No, I was just wanting to know, how much money does the state put out and how much money do we get from the federal government?
The total for ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, we're looking at about $225 million. And then there's 7.6 million that's coming from the state. So 99.9% is tied to this ESSER money. The other piece is the MSIS money. That's
125 comes from the federal government.
that's correct.
that's correct.
You have to match it with 7.6 million?
No, there is no match requirement. That's what.
Match requirement. That's what the feds gave us to spend and to award was the total amount. There is no match requirement. The state legislature appropriated $7.6 million last session for the MSIS upgrade. So that's the only piece of the state funds that's included in this. It's strictly for the MSIS upgrade. But 99% of this is all ESSER money.
Tell them what MSIS is. We have some new people who may not know what MSIS is.
MSIS is our student information system. It's the system that all the school districts feed their information into, attendance and accountability, and all of that information is fed into that system. And it's 30 plus years old, so that's what we've been asking the legislature to upgrade these last several years.
That's been one of the
Priorities.
priorities of the department, was trying to upgrade this system so that good data comes in and good data goes out, and we really know where we are. Dr. McGee, wait just a minute. Ms. Warner, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Dr. McGee?
Joe, from a state standpoint, though, the 7.6 million does not have a timeline, does it?
Yes. Yes,
It has a June 30th timeline. All fiscal dollars appropriated, year to year. So this money expires June of 2022. So, and the reason that piece is in here, because the 7.6 million that the legislature appropriated, that's not enough funds to actually do the entire system upgrade. That is, a $13 million project. So we're taking this opportunity to use those funds as well as the ESSER dollars to get that process on the way. And this process will not be complete by June of next year. So we need those dollars as well as an emergency procurement.
Gonna spend extra money on state funding for MSIS?
I'm sorry.
Are we going to allocate funding from the federal government to upgrade MSIS?
There's some pieces of it that we will be using ESSER dollars for, yes, and a large portion of that, it's all tied to COVID. There are different requirements that as a result of COVID that the feds have put on us that we're not able to collect that particular data at this point. So we will use those funds to be able to respond to the needs.
These requirements are, the money that's coming through ESSA has a lot of requirements on it, as does the state, and they all have very short timelines that I suspect a lot of states are not going to be able to meet. And I think one of the things that I think Mr. Goff may have said is that other agencies throughout the state have been using this same process. We're not plowing new ground here. We're just following the process that's available to us. So if there are no other comments or questions from the board, I will call for a motion. Do we have a motion to approve the declaration as?
You're making the motion?
Yes.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second, Karen Elam.
Okay, thank you, Dr.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Elam.
Questions or comments? All in favor, raise your hand so we can see you. Or say aye. Let's see, 1, 2.
Aye.
6. Okay, those opposed?
No.
Okay, motion carries. So,
3, 4, 5,
You have
6 to
everybody
1.
6
Is
to
that
1.
right? 6 to 1. Okay. All right, we have no other business, so I will entertain a motion that we adjourn, and I thank you for your time. We've had a good discussion, and we will press on. So is there?
So moved, Karen Elam.
Dr. Elam, Mr. East is the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? All right. Thank you very much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.